If you're like most people, when you hear the word hyena, you probably picture one of those giggling weirdos from The Lion King, kind of creepy, kind of stupid, and mostly just comic relief with a mean streak. They scavenge, they cackle, they mess up Scar's plans because, let's face it, they're not exactly working with full brain capacity. But what if I told you there was a real prehistoric hyena? One that didn't laugh, didn't fumble, and absolutely would have gotten the job done? A creature so strong, so intimidating, and so unapologetically brutal that if this hyena had been Scar's wingman, Pride Rock would have been reduced to rubble before Simba even figured out how to roar. Meet Pachycrocuta brevirostris, a giant hyena from the Pleistocene that made modern spotted hyenas look like wind-up toys. Twice the size, 5 times the bite force, and absolutely not here to be the punchline. If this monster had shown up in the Pridelands, there wouldn't have been a movie. There would have been a massacre. So let's dig up the bones, crank the sarcasm, and find out why this prehistoric tank of a hyena could have flipped the entire Lion King storyline on its head. Spoiler: Scar definitely would have won. Let's get one thing straight. Pachycrocuta brevirostris was not your average scavenger. This wasn't some lazy, half-starved wannabe predator waiting around for leftovers like it just clocked out of a shift at the food court. No. This was a bone-crushing, apex-problematic, evolutionary slap in the face to anything that dared call itself a carnivore. Clocking in at roughly 220 pounds, maybe even more, about the size of a lioness, Pachycrocuta wasn't just big for a hyena, it was massive by any standard. Its skull alone looked like something you'd expect to find in a boss fight. Short, wide, and built like a fossilized brick, this head housed a jaw with a bite force that could reduce elephant femurs to powder. That's not hyperbole. It literally had hypertrophied premolars adapted to crush bones. You know, the kind of dental specialization you develop when your diet includes entire skeletons. Its body? Not built for elegance. Pachycrocuta had a hunchbacked frame, like it had been carrying prehistoric trauma on its shoulders. Thick forelimbs, barrel chest, dense spine. Basically, the linebacker of the Ice Age. If a modern hyena looks like a scrappy punk in a bar fight, this thing was the bar, and the fight, and probably the collapsed building after. Fossil evidence of this nightmare fuel has been found across Africa, Southern Europe, and Asia, making it one of the most widespread giant carnivores of its time. In fact, it lived from about 3 million to 400,000 years ago, showing up long before humans were doing anything useful and hanging around long enough to become a problem for everyone else on the menu. Now, sure, it likely had to share the stage with other Ice Age megafauna, saber-toothed cats, giant bears, and early big cats. But Pachycrocuta didn't care. Its adaptations didn't suggest it was scared of competition. Its entire body screams, "Bring it." And while some paleontologists originally thought it was purely a scavenger, more recent isotopic analysis and fossil site reconstructions say otherwise. Basically, bones of large prey animals found near hyena dens show signs of active hunting behavior, meaning yes, this thing could chase you down, kill you, and then digest every part of you except maybe your shadow. Modern spotted hyenas, the kind you see in documentaries chewing on wildebeest butt, are no joke either. They can bite through bone, run for miles, and dismantle prey like it's IKEA furniture. But compared to Pachycrocuta, they're like angry little cousins trying to borrow the car keys. If you're wondering how it looked visually, think less cartoon sidekick and more prehistoric fridge with teeth. The massive neck muscles alone meant it could rip limbs off without bothering to reposition. And because nature loves overkill, it had disproportionately strong front legs for dragging heavy carcasses. Or, clearing the remains of a rival pride. So yeah, if Scar had one of these walking meat grinders on his payroll, Mufasa wouldn't have died in a stampede. he would have just been eaten. Let's not sugarcoat it. If you were a lion trying to make it in the same ecosystem as Pachycrocuta brevirostris, your options boiled down to 1. Relocate, 2. Starve, or 3. Become hyena chow. None of which are ideal when you're supposed to be the king of anything. Modern lions are intimidating, sure. Big, strong, social, with claws designed to end things quickly. But Pachycrocuta wasn't playing by modern rules. This thing existed in a time when apex predator was a title you had to defend daily, not just flash around like a golden mane. And unlike today's hyenas, who kind of hover around the carcass like freeloading party guests waiting for the buffet, Pachycrocuta was perfectly capable of either killing its own meal or taking yours, forcefully, loudly, with teeth. Fossil sites in places like Zhoukoudian, China, and the Atapuerca Mountains in Spain show a brutal dynamic between Pachycrocuta and other Ice Age carnivores. Prey remains are often shattered, not just chewed, but obliterated. Limbs cracked open to get to the marrow, skulls crushed like overripe fruit. It's like every kill site was also a prehistoric crime scene. No delicate nibbling here, this was demolition dining. Now, the real kicker is how often Pachycrocuta crossed paths with lions, or their ancient equivalents. We're talking about cohabiting turf with Eurasian cave lions, Panthera spelaea, and African lions in overlapping ranges. There's even indirect fossil evidence suggesting confrontations, lion bones found with chew marks matching hyena teeth, and vice versa. These weren't friendly neighbors borrowing sugar. These were turf wars, violent, bloody, and loud. And the idea that Pachycrocuta hunted in packs? That's not just speculation. Based on the patterns of fossil accumulation in dens, it's likely that they operated in social groups, meaning if you encountered one, you were probably about to meet 4 more. Let that sink in. You're a lion. You've just brought down a hard-earned kill, and suddenly, 5 SUV-sized hyenas show up, each built like a hairy boulder with jaws that make bolt cutters jealous. You either give up dinner or become dinner. And here's where it gets personal. Lions rely heavily on group hunting, but they're also incredibly territorial. They don't like sharing. They'll fight other prides, rogue males, leopards, wild dogs, basically anything that steps on their turf. But when Pachycrocuta showed up, it wasn't a fair fight. This wasn't a lightweight conflict over stolen scraps. This was an all-out survival brawl against a creature evolved to win these exact fights. Bone-breaking jaws versus clawed swipes. Raw brute force versus speed and coordination. The lions may have had numbers and tactics, but Pachycrocuta had the kind of combat hardware nature doesn't hand out casually. Think about it. Teeth for cracking bones, a skull built like a battering ram, limbs thick enough to look like prehistoric tree trunks, and zero fear. That's a rough matchup, even if you're rocking a mane and a roar. Even scarier, there's evidence that Pachycrocuta targeted young vulnerable prey, including juvenile megafauna and possibly cubs left unattended. Yeah, that kind of predator. The one that goes for your weakest link, not out of cruelty, but efficiency. Not only could it win fights against grown lions, but it may have been systematically sabotaging their future generations too. Oof. So, imagine being Scar in this situation. He's already got leadership problems, emotional baggage, and some very questionable strategy choices. Now give him a squad of these prehistoric tanks? Game over. Mufasa never gets to the gorge. Simba doesn't get a coming-of-age montage. Rafiki retires early. Pride Rock becomes Bone Pile Central. Lions might be icons now, but during Pachycrocuta's reign, they were just another carnivore trying not to get flattened. And spoiler alert, not all of them succeeded. Alright, so we've established that Pachycrocuta brevirostris was big. We've established it was bad. But now it's time to talk about how it actually operated. Because this thing wasn't just scary in theory. It was terrifying in practice. If modern hyenas are nature's chaos gremlins, Pachycrocuta was the fully upgraded industrial strength version, all brute, no bluff. Let's start with the jaws. This wasn't your average meat-ripping setup. Pachycrocuta had some of the most powerful bite mechanics in the mammalian fossil record. We're talking about a bite force estimated at over 5,000 newtons, which, for reference, is roughly the equivalent of getting your arm caught in a car crusher. Not ideal. Its massive premolars weren't just for decoration. They were designed to split femurs, smash skulls, and crack open the hardest parts of a carcass to get to the nutrient-rich marrow. You know, the stuff most predators can't reach. Pachycrocuta wasn't eating around bones, it was eating through them. And unlike cats, which rely on slicing and stealth, this beast was built for power over finesse. Its skull was short and wide, giving it a massive surface area for jaw muscle attachment. That thick, hunchbacked frame? Yeah, it supported oversized neck and shoulder muscles, ideal for anchoring its head while tearing something apart, or dragging half a mammoth back to the den. Its forelimbs were over-engineered for pulling and ripping, like prehistoric grappling hooks. This wasn't a sprinting predator. Its legs weren't built for speed, they were built for endurance. Pachycrocuta probably relied on long pursuits, not cheetah fast, but relentless. Think more Terminator than track star. It wasn't going to catch you in a flash. It was going to wear you down, then disassemble you piece by piece. If it sounds like a horror movie villain, that's because it basically was. And while some have called it a scavenger, that's only half the story. Yes, its bone-crushing adaptations made it well-suited to cleaning up after kills. But modern isotopic analyses of Pachycrocuta bones suggest that it also got a significant portion of its food from active hunting. That's right, despite being a hulking, lumbering meat processor, it had the tools and the mindset to chase something down and personally end its day. The real fun starts when you consider how it processed its food. With its teeth and digestive system, Pachycrocuta could digest almost every part of its prey. Bones, ligaments, cartilage, the whole deal. Its digestive tract was likely similar to that of modern hyenas, which are capable of breaking down bone material into usable nutrients and pooping out calcium dust. Yes, Pachycrocuta was basically nature's garbage disposal, but with anger issues and a vendetta against anything that moved. And let's talk strategy. Fossil evidence from dens suggests it stockpiled bones, dragging carcasses back to feeding areas, or possibly communal dens, where young or other members of the group could also chow down. This behavior is similar to that of today's spotted hyenas, only on a much more horrifying scale. Imagine walking into a cave filled with shattered rhino bones, crushed skulls, and the chewed-up leftovers of the Pleistocene. You've just stepped into a Pachycrocuta living room. If Scar had these things in his corner, the war for Pride Rock wouldn't have been a war. It would have been pest control. One pack of these hyenas could have reduced Simba's family reunion to a fossil exhibit. No dramatic musical numbers, no Hakuna Matata, just a trail of crushed skeletons and a lion population wondering where it all went wrong. So while the Lion King gave us giggling sidekicks and questionable survival logic, the real world gave us this walking wrecking ball with teeth. And no, you wouldn't have seen it coming. Not because it was stealthy, but because you were too busy running for your life. Let's play a little game of paleo fan fiction. Imagine you're not watching The Lion King on a cozy couch, but instead transported straight into the late Pleistocene, somewhere in what's now southern Europe or North Africa. The air's thick with the smell of blood and crushed leaves. There's no Hakuna, no Matata, just raw survival. And in this version of the story, Scar's backup isn't 3 buffoonish scavengers with more attitude than ability. It's a squad of Pachycrocuta brevirostris, ready to ruin everyone's afternoon. Let's set the scene. Scar, a jaded male lion with a grudge and an inferiority complex, is scheming to take down Mufasa. But instead of plotting with giggle hyenas who couldn't take down a gazelle without tripping over each other, Scar finds a den of Pachycrocuta. He approaches them cautiously, but they don't flinch. Why would they? He's just a 400-pound cat. They eat bigger things for brunch, and yet, somehow, they strike a deal. Scar provides distraction and chaos. The hyenas, they provide brute force enforcement. Within days, the Pridelands become hyena central. No kill is safe. No cub is protected. Bones vanish. Whole herds start migrating in the opposite direction just from the scent trails. The ecosystem flips upside down. Why? Because Pachycrocuta wasn't just a predator, it was an ecological reset button. These creatures didn't nibble around the edges of the food chain. They demolished it. Once they showed up in numbers, prey animals had two choices: leave or get rendered into marrow soup. They didn't just eat meat. They erased evidence that a meal ever existed. And Scar, in this twisted alternate universe, watches from Pride Rock like a smug warlord. Mufasa? Let's just say he didn't survive the first encounter, not because of betrayal in a gorge, but because one of these hyenas clamped down on his femur and didn't stop until there was nothing left but a few shredded tendons and the sound of teeth on bone. Simba, gone into exile, not because he's traumatized, but because every time he heard a hyena growl, he had to change locations. Fast. Rafiki? Moved to higher ground. Timon and Pumbaa? Yeah, they're extinct now. Now, let's back that scenario up with some real-world fossil spice. There's actual evidence that Pachycrocuta coexisted with early lions and saber-toothed cats in overlapping regions. Sites like Venta Messina in Spain show massive bone accumulations, believed to be Pachycrocuta dens, and those bones include parts of large herbivores, juvenile animals, and sometimes even other carnivores. These weren't just trash heaps, they were the leftovers of dominance. In one layer, paleontologists found the shattered remains of a juvenile cave lion, bite marks on the skull, punctures through the eye socket. Was it scavenged? Maybe. Was it hunted? Possibly. Either way, it didn't end well for the lion. And then there's the issue of competition. Saber-tooths had those dramatic canine daggers, but they weren't made for bone crushing or high-endurance scavenging. Big cats like Panthera spelaea had powerful bites, but not the same resistance to bone shards and decayed tissue. Pachycrocuta, on the other hand, thrived in mess. It was perfectly evolved for a chaotic, carcass-filled environment. While lions had to eat quickly and move on to avoid scavenger gangs, Pachycrocuta was the gang, and it never left early. In pack situations, they probably coordinated to surround and pressure even large prey, maybe using sheer weight and persistence rather than stealth or speed. A rhino that would scare off a lion pride? Just another slow-moving lunchbox to a group of these things. So yeah, if you swap out Shenzi, Banzai, and Ed for 3 Pachycrocuta brevirostris, that movie's runtime drops to about 7 minutes. Scar wins. Pride Rock becomes a hyena stronghold. The circle of life becomes a straight line to extinction. Alright, so we've established that Pachycrocuta brevirostris was basically the prehistoric version of a wrecking ball with teeth. It had the bite force, the body mass, the attitude, and the ecosystem dominance to make lions seriously consider career changes. But here's the plot twist. Despite being a heavyweight champion of the Pleistocene, this bone-munching beast still went extinct. Which brings us to the part of the story where Scar's little empire comes crashing down, not because of a heroic lion cub with a catchy soundtrack, but because Mother Nature doesn't do long-term contracts. She giveth, and then she taketh away, usually with extreme prejudice. Let's rewind to around 400,000 years ago when Pachycrocuta brevirostris vanished from the fossil record. One day, it's at the top of the food chain, chewing through the Ice Age buffet like it owns the place. The next, gone. Fossil silence. Like the entire genus just Irish exited the Pleistocene. So what happened? Oh, well, a few things. First, competition. Around this time, modern lions, Panthera leo, were evolving into more efficient, cooperative hunters. They were faster, leaner, and had the advantage of actual teamwork that didn't revolve around brute force and dental dominance. Meanwhile, early Homo species, yes, our delightful ancestors, were also rising in numbers and expanding their territories. And unlike Pachycrocuta, we came with tools, fire, and a whole lot of ambition. There's strong evidence that humans and other hominins began scavenging and eventually competing for the same large carcasses. Fossil sites show butchery marks from stone tools on bones that would have otherwise gone straight into the digestive furnace of Pachycrocuta. And let's be honest, for all its jaw power, Pachycrocuta never figured out how to make a hand axe or throw a rock with intent. Second, changing prey dynamics. As Ice Age megafauna began to disappear due to climate fluctuations, overhunting, and habitat change, Pachycrocuta found itself in a bind. It specialized in feeding on massive herbivores, things like woolly rhinos, giant deer, and elephants. But once those animals started declining, there was less food to fight over, less food, more competition, shorter lifespan for apex freeloaders. And while its bone-crushing diet was great for cleaning up after the messiest parts of the food chain, it also meant Pachycrocuta was less flexible. Smaller prey? Not really worth the energy. Quick prey? Not built for it. Plants? Laughable. It was a specialist in a world that was starting to favor generalists. Evolution doesn't like one-trick ponies, even when that trick is turning femurs into dust. Then there's the reproduction problem. Based on comparisons to modern hyenas, it's likely that Pachycrocuta had a low reproductive rate, which is fine when you're the top carnivore and no one's touching your cubs. But once humans, saber-tooths, and advanced big cats started breathing down its neck, sometimes literally, it couldn't pump out enough offspring to keep up. And don't forget the climate factor. The Pleistocene was basically Earth's version of a mood swing. Glacial periods would roll in, ecosystems would shift, and grasslands would turn into tundra or forests seemingly overnight. That kind of environmental whiplash is tough even for adaptable species. For a lumbering carnivore specialized in large kills and long-range scavenging, it's game over. So in our fictional Lion King reboot, Scar might have had his moment of glory. Maybe he even ruled for a while with his tank hyena enforcers. But eventually, the environment would have turned against him. The herds would have vanished. The rains would have stopped. And the first group of upright tool-wielding bipeds would have arrived on the scene, looked at Pachycrocuta and thought, that would make a great coat, or at least a cool necklace. Extinction isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's a slow fade. Less food, fewer cubs, more threats. One generation gets a little smaller, then the next, then the next. And eventually, all that's left are bones in a cave and a few paleontologists whispering, well, that escalated quietly. So yes, Scar could have won the battle. But the war, that belonged to time, climate, and the most unexpectedly dangerous species of all, us. Let's just take a collective moment to appreciate the fact that Pachycrocuta brevirostris is extremely, gloriously extinct. Because let's be honest, if this prehistoric, bone-splintering nightmare were still roaming around today, camping trips, safaris, and basically all outdoor activities would require tank armor and a strong Wi-Fi signal to call for emergency extraction. Bird watching? Cancelled? Hyena watching? Not unless you enjoy watching yourself get processed into bone meal. We're talking about an animal that made lions nervous. That could bite through your femur like it was a breadstick. That actively hoarded bones like a prehistoric dragon, except instead of guarding treasure, it was just collecting leftovers. And sure, it's fun to imagine a Lion King scenario where Scar gets his revenge thanks to his Jurassic Death Squad. But realistically, nobody survives that movie. Simba doesn't reclaim the throne, he becomes hyena takeout. Rafiki doesn't wave a stick, he gets turned into enrichment chew toy material. Timon and Pumbaa? There's not enough Hakuna in the world to matata that situation. And yet, here we are, safe. cozy. Living in a world where the scariest hyena you'll meet is behind glass at a zoo, and maybe makes weird sounds that vaguely resemble laughter. Pachycrocuta brevirostris is gone. And that's great news for your femurs. So next time someone tells you hyenas are just weird scavengers, go ahead and tell them about the one that could have helped Scar win, turned lions into lunch, and redefined circle of life into more of a grind cycle.